On this week's episode of Let's Talk Dog Business, we have dog behaviourist Andrew Hale talking about the importance of self and inner work.
I love this. This is a great way to open up an episode. I'm actually going to include it on this one. So for everybody listening, our sound guy, Ryan, likes to do a stupid little wave behind the camera to say that we're ready. And it always sets us off, but we're getting used to it now.
And the clappy board before that as well.
And Andrew, you have just witnessed it yourself, haven't you? So you can see what we have to deal with when we're doing these podcasts.
Yeah, well, it's great to see you. And, it's the best start already. We haven't even started yet. I've been clapperboarded in. The handsome Ryan. It's a countdown, getting us all ready in the studio, a sense of kind of something amazing's about to happen. A great start.
Set the tone.
I like it. So, Andrew, for everyone out there who may have no idea who you are, and if you are that, who are you and where have you been? Tell us more about your lovely self.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's always a great chance to talk about what we do as professionals. And I think what you're doing with your podcast is a really good way for people to think about all sorts of different topics about what we do. So then start. So I work as a behaviourist here in the UK, working with dogs. Before that, I've got a human psychology background. So I was involved in human therapies for a long time before I shifted over to other animals. And that's the big link for me because I've always been really interested in the individual's lived emotional experience, whether that's the human or now the dog. So those are the things that connect in. I've got some great roles that I get involved with. I'm an expert advisor for canine arthritis management. I love a lot of the things that the wonderful Hannah's doing there with Cam. I'm the behavioural consultant with Pet Remedy, and I love what they're doing, trying to promote emotional well-being to animals. So there is definitely a thread that kind of connects all these things together. So that's just a little bit about me and my background, but they do all connect, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that emotional well-being bit is so important. We've been, I think on the last couple of episodes, it's become something that's quite prevalent and comes up quite a lot, doesn't it? That we need to be considering that well-being of not only the animals that we're looking after and the dogs in our cases as professionals, but also ourselves as professionals, because it feels like we're in a moment in time where a lot of people are either leaving the industry because of burnout or this imposter syndrome or whatever it may be. But there's a lot of people that are almost on like tenterhooks and on that cliff edge of whether or not they're going to stay or go. And there's loads of...
a song about that, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. It's normally me, does that?
I've got that in my head now.
It's normally me who's the jukebox in this relationship. But yeah, I think what are you seeing on your side of it in terms of that emotional well-being of us as dog professionals?
Well, I think we have to be really honest about it. I think we have an emotional health crisis going on for many reasons. And I think it's always been there a bit anyway. I've been in the community, in the dog training world for about 15 years. So that 15 years ago, I started my training and things, and my own in-person business is coming up for 10 years old next year. So, I've seen a lot of changes in that time. And I think it's always been a community that attracts a certain type of person anyway, and especially for us that work in the way that we all do, a particularly empathetic person, caring person, wanting to make a difference, caring about the dogs. But when we think about how unstructured our community is, when you think about the fact that it's unregulated, of course, although there are forms of regulation within it. So I'm certified with the Association of Interdogs. That's part of the UK Dog Behaviour and Training Charter. So there's elements there that do have some elements of accountability for us if you choose to do it. But of course, you don't have to be that. this is where some of the problems come in. So if you imagine then, we can unpack some of this today actually a little bit, because this is why I really want us to think more about our own emotional well-being and our own emotional health, and especially our kind of our self-esteem and our boundaries and all these kind of things, because we come in with a passion because we want to work with dogs. And then over time, we convert that to find our purpose, what we're going to do. We can talk about that a little bit as well. But there are so many routes to entry to our community, so many different education providers, all trying to say they're the best. And if you're with us, we're great, but everybody else is rubbish. All different types of internal cultures. So you have those people who are accredited with maybe a member-led organization, like an association. You have those who are getting their accreditations from the same people they got their learning from. And you get other people that are getting their accreditations through commercially based accreditors. So that's a mixed culture. And then you have, because of the nature of that, those particular organizations, associations, different entry routes for education saying, well, we're the best. And that's not as good because that's just this and that's just that. So you've already got these kind of disparities that are already playing out. And then you add in the more structured learning side of things, those people who've gone through maybe university and got degrees and MScs. Then we have different categories now. So we have like clinical behaviourists, those people who have gone through that kind of process. And then you have those who aren't that. So there's just that, and that's just the entry points in education, and I've already covered tons there. Let alone all the other.
It's a lot when you start listing out.
It is when you think about it. So it's no wonder people are really insecure, because this is part of the issue, I think. And then also on top of that, I say we're unregulated anyway. Then we have the whole social media space to try and navigate, which is a relatively new thing. I have to say, something happened at COVID for me, I think, looking at how space got inhabited. Because pre-COVID, I think all of us used social media, but it was an add-on to what we did in real life, really. And there was none of this kind of Zoom and that kind of, it was there, but we didn't use it. And then we also have this push towards some kind of external, extrinsic metric based on what success is, and how we then and that just fuels into that comparative part of our brain that just compares ourselves to others based on other metrics. So that's another factor. So that's just a couple of bits, let alone all the other things. So it's no wonder then we have a lot of insecure people who are struggling with imposter syndrome, as we class it, although it's a bit of a stuck on label in a way. Obviously, there's a lot of different ways of looking at imposter syndrome, but we can look at that a little bit today as well. But and a huge lack of safe spaces to feel supported. So it can feel really lonely, right? And a lot of I call them the quiet majority, those that don't get involved in the drama, just get their head down, rather than having healthy self-esteem and creating healthy boundaries. They're more likely just to put up barriers. So they don't get involved with stuff. That also means they don't put out stuff necessarily, and they just go through boom and bust cycles quietly. And it's just a story I hear again and again.
Yeah, it's very cyclical, isn't it? You see it time and time again, and it doesn't feel like there's ever been a moment where something quite profound has happened in the industry to try and stop that. I mean, ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. We're hoping we can be part of that journey to go, let's stop this little boom and bust thing. Let's try and create a collaborative space where we can all feel connected. We can all reach out to one another without that fear of rejection, I suppose, from somebody else, without that judgment. And I think you're right. I think social media is and can be a very challenging and damaging place to be in. But then on the flip side, it's a crucially integral bit of the puzzle to run a business.
Increasingly so, of course. And I think this is, for me, the most important thing. So I do some emotional health workshops for professionals. I've got some more coming up soon, actually. And because all the stuff that we think about that we need to do, all the things that we might want to do with our work, building our business, building our brand, if you don't have some quite important foundations in place, you're being really open to all these challenges that we're talking about in a bigger way. What I mean by that is that there's two important questions I ask at the emotional health workshops, and they're really important. And we need safer spaces to think about this as a profession, because when you think about what we do for behaviourists and trainers specifically, we literally turn up to the challenges of others, sometimes the suffering of others, actually, on a daily basis, with no real input, education, or support about our own emotional safety in that. So my husband, he's an end-of-life nurse. He works at a hospice, quite a tough job, but he gets supervision every month. He gets supervision every month so that he can continue to turn up for others. So for me, then, there's two important questions. The first question, it's a really profound one, and it's a deep one. The first one is, who are you? Who am I? Who are you? Because what we have to recognize is, as a human being, we have had to carry the burden of the judgments and expectations of others from quite a young age. And it feeds into our brain, it feeds into our narratives. It helps create our belief systems about self. And that's why, for many of us, myself included, and by the way, it took me my own personal breakdown to work all this out. So, I'm not suggesting that's the way to do it, but that was my part of my story. But we have to recognize that a lot of those voices in our heads that stop us from turning up, that make it difficult, that makes us want to hide away a bit, they're often narratives that have been put in by somebody else. So even just asking, well, who am I now as an adult? Who is writing my story now? Is it still that teacher at school who told me I'll be no good, or that unhelpful parent, or, my trauma? It's about understanding that. So obviously that's quite a big, but it's a fundamental thing, because people talk about finding ways to believe in yourself. Actually, I think the first thing is to find ways to be yourself. Truly think. So I've got to a point in my career, in my life, where I am Andy. I will turn up as Andy, and it has to be enough. And everything else comes from that. So I try to be and work. It doesn't mean that it's easy. Emotional health is like physical health. You have to work at it, but you have to have a foundated starting point. And that's building a healthy self-esteem, recognizing that we are all enough, but our value of our worth is what shifts over time because of often the voices of others. So we have to really believe that. So that's the first thing. Who are we? And thinking about those things. And sometimes we need help with that. So I had my own breakdown and I needed help with that. But on a level that we can do, us in this kind of virtual space, in the way that we support professionals, the second thing is, who are you as a professional? And I think that is such an important question, doesn't it get asked enough? Because when I turn up to see my client, I support a lot of colleagues, I've done over the years. And it's another common theme where, because their own self-esteem is low, because their boundaries are a bit porous, because their sense of self-worth is somehow compromised, they feel that they somehow have to prove to the client that they know what they're talking about, that they have to prove to the client that they were the right person to be employed, and can maybe spend the first hour of being with that client spurting out all this stuff to try and prove that. So,
I'm laughing because I remember being there.
We've all been. I think this is the key. And I think, so already then actually, we're already compromising a process for me. I think that when you understand, so for me, again, I know why I'm there. They've already employed me, right? And I feel confident in that. And I'm not there to impress on them anything about me. So me as a human being, well, that's already ring fenced anyway, because they might not like me, like what I do, or anything else. That's fine, but that's got nothing to do with me. That's their perception of me, and that's up to them to have it. On a professional level, I can only offer them what I can offer them, and I have to believe in it myself. I have to believe in that process. I believe in that purpose. One of the humbling things we have to recognize is, for every person that knows you, there is a different version of you. So what that means is everybody who meets you, they're going to look at you through their own lens, their own perception of the world, their own value systems, their own belief systems. So if you think about it then, all those hundreds, thousands of people that know you or know of you will have a different version of you. Your closest people to you, so my husband, for example, his version of me is probably the closest version of me, but it's still his version of me. So when you think about all those people then who hold us in very high regard, who have high expectations of us, and if you think about those people who don't have that high regard for us, who judge us and perhaps judge us unkindly and, unfairly, wouldn't it be crazy if we had to keep trying to mold ourselves to fulfill the expectations of all those people, think I've got to fulfill that, or to change ourselves to get those others to like us and respect us? That would be crazy, right? But that's what many of us end up falling into, and that's that people-pleasing mindset. And that's the first little thread that is going to start to be unpicked as a professional when you think about how many different people you see in different situations, and you're going to end up finding less and less of yourself in the process because you're desperately trying to get that client to see value in what you do and like you and get people to write nice remarks on your post or whatever it is that you're doing. So actually understanding some of this foundated stuff is really important for us, because one of the little golden rules really of human therapies, when I was involved in supporting humans, is to do that, you have to ensure that you're in as a well-regulated emotionally and physically state as possible. And that's why supervision is so important. Because I cannot turn up to your care and support needs as a therapist if I'm not attaining to my own. And in fact, if we think about compassion fatigue, which is something else that we see a lot in our community, that's a sign often that the individual is struggling with self-compassion first. Because compassion isn't a finite thing. You haven't got a little pot of it. And you think, oh, I've run out of it. Oh, well. You can be compassionate all the time if you're self-compassionate first. The question we have to ask there is then, and I ask this in my workshops because this is the feedback I get often is, I find it really hard for self-compassion though. So why? And that comes back to the first question about who are we? What is our story? What has happened in our life that means it's so difficult to actually think, I need to look after myself first because I can't do this for other people. And that's when we end up having boom and bust, of course, because burnout, compassion fatigue, imposter syndrome, they're all kind of connected in a way. It's all about the day-to-day stresses and strains and burdens that are put on us just through the act of turning up to the support of another.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting all you've said there, because the very first point of that messaging on people's websites and social media is that it comes across quite desperate a lot of the time. Like, I will accommodate every single need. I'll work with every single dog and every single issue. And I can be that everything to everyone. And I think the very first point that clients are seeing is that almost desperate. And as sad as that sounds, that's how it comes across sometimes to us, definitely. Like, we see that and go, oh gosh, you don't have to do that. You don't have to be everyone.
No, and I think this is where we have to break that down and think about where that need to do those things comes from. And actually, it's quite helpful just to break it down into three very distinct little entities, really. So the first one is to recognize there's a part of our brain that is our more defensive part of the brain, if you like. And I think it's a good idea to name that part of the brain. So mine's called Bob. And Bob wants to dive straight in and, Bob wants to tell me I'm not good enough or put a rageful reply to somebody who's been rude on social media or whatever. And our Bob's, whatever name you want to give that part of the brain, that part of the brain is, there's a saying in human psychology that feelings are not facts. Bob works in feelings big time. I feel this and I must react. And it's very much our kind of monkey part of the brain, if you like. If you want to, the Chimp Paradox is a great book that looks at that part of the brain. And, but we have to recognize that we still need to be aware of Bob and treat Bob with some love, because Bob just wants to keep me safe. So I've had trauma when I was younger, and Bob has very much been born out of that trauma as well, and all the kind of life events we have, and Bob has often more of a negative bias, more of a pessimistic bias. But that's just because Bob wants to keep us safe. But this is a really good little thing to consider. Our feelings, our moods, our experiences, our trauma, Bob. It's not about dismissing these things. It's about us learning how we change our relationship with them. So I've learned to change my relationship with Bob. I've learned how to change my relationship with my trauma and this kind of thing. So we'll come back to Bob in a minute. The other thing is recognizing the role of our ego. And ego is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing having an ego. We've all got an ego. And our ego is more likely to have more of an optimistic outlook of stuff. And actually, I read something really interesting about imposter syndrome recently, really interesting. I can't remember the author as a clinical psychologist, but about how, what a broad brush that term is, imposter syndrome, of course. It was very much coined specifically when it was first kind of brought up in the 70s about women in very high, powerful positions who still didn't feel good enough. I think I'm looking at the psychology behind that. But more broadly, we use it as a kind of a broad way of saying, I've got imposter syndrome, which means I don't feel good enough and it's hard to turn up. But actually, there's some psychologists talking about the role of ego. And it's a really interesting thing, and it's a really humbling thing. And this is why we have to be quite vulnerable with ourselves. So when it's easy for us to think, I'm not going to put that article out because I don't feel good enough. But actually to recognize part of that is also our ego feeling, well, I am good enough and I want to be seen. And why aren't I being the one who gets invited to the conference? Why aren't I the one who has the book out and the TV show? And I think it was really interesting to understand that part of the thing that holds us back is also our ego wanting to push us forwards. But we don't like to acknowledge ego much, do we? Because we want to be humble and everything else rather than think of it. And especially if, if we put something out, say, put an article out, we've all been there. I was talking about this on something else recently. I do workshops. Many of them sell really well. I put one out, last year. It was like tumbleweed. I didn't get anybody, right? And I think that it happens to everybody. This is the point. Sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't. And it's easy to hide behind imposter and thinking, it's not good. That's Bob, you see. Bob's jumping in now saying, you're not good enough. Why bother? Don't do it again. You made an idiot of yourself. But actually ego saying, but why aren't people coming? Because I'm bloody brilliant and I need to be. That's interesting. So we got Bob and we got the ego. And then let's say there's the three components. The third component is us. It's me as Andy, and with my thinking brain, my prefrontal cortex, my ability to kind of take a breath and think, right, that was upsetting, but let me just take a breath. And I think it's important to understand these mechanics, because I think as an individual who doesn't, we just get lost in Bob, or we feel torn with the ego. And then if we're not careful, we end up putting up those barriers and disappearing off and not being heard of again for a couple of years until we've licked our wounds and come back again or something, which we see a fair bit. So all this stuff's really, really relevant.
Oh, it's so interesting, isn't it? I love all the psychology stuff. I think it's really interesting. But you can see where it does actually hold people back, can't you? And I think it's really interesting that you want to do that stuff. So I've even found myself, even recently, going like, I don't mean to sound ego, but actually I'm quite proud of this achievement. And I'm justifying that ego part of it, because you do want to be humble about the stuff that you're doing. But arguably, there's nothing wrong with shouting about something that you're good at either. And certainly when you are trying to help more people, well, people are going to be attracted to you if you're shouting about all the things that you're good at. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like it's a little bit of self destruction, isn't it? And then we get stuck in this cycle, and then it's that, like business isn't working, I'm not getting enough leads in, I'm not getting it. And then you can almost blame all the tangible things that you could be doing off the back, but a lot of it is that internal mindset.
Mm-hmm. And it's also, we're really good at bigging other people up and our clients up and going, you've got this, you can do this, give them all the ego boost they need. And then we have to go, oh, a little win, and we squash it back down again with something else, because we're like, no, we can't get too high above our station. And I think that's what we have, that internal fight with those three components.
And that's why it's good to break things down a bit, because I think, so when we feel at home with self and being at home with self, having healthy self-esteem, I like the word healthy there, because it's not always high. Sometimes it's lower, but it's healthy because you have your ups and downs. But this notion of, I'm at real peace with myself. That's my dark as well as my light. This is the point. The things that have happened, all these kind of things, it's recognizing I can only actually be Andy, and I'm going to turn up as Andy, and it'll have to be enough. And then I'll leave it to you to decide that. That's the us bit. That's our connection to self. And that's why I think rather than believe in ourselves, I think we just need to learn how to be ourselves and find our purpose. And that's the thing we believe in, and that's the thing we shout about, and that's the thing we have the confidence in, and that's the thing that we let our ego attach to. Because by slightly detaching from self, it protects self a little bit. Because, I do all sorts of different projects. So I say some of them land, some of them don't. The ones that don't, that's about my purpose and what I'm doing with my purpose, not about me personally. And I think that's important. This is how we help to define success. I think it's about truly finding our purpose. You must find this as business coaches, I'm sure. A lot of people come in with passion, and I think that a passion actually isn't enough, because a passion is it's a bit like a balloon waiting to be popped, because guess what? When it doesn't work, it's like, it wasn't how I envisioned it. Once you convert passion to purpose, that's what keeps you moving forwards. And the more our purpose is about our mission, the better, because we don't want our self. I find a lot of colleagues who I've supported, it's been more about their need for self. And that's when it's a problem, I think, because if we think about the friction between enough and more, we have to start recognizing, before we can do more, what enough is. And more then should be about growth. We move into more. But the more extrinsic stuff that we seek as part of our way forwards, and especially the more that we look for its extrinsic validation, number of likes, money, whatever else, it becomes a problem, because it's never enough. And that's important. So money's we've got to move away from this notion that making money is a bad thing. There's a lot of people in our community who think, it's a bit bad making money. But yeah, we're allowed to make money, and that's a good thing. And I think that's great. But if we measure our success on external metrics, it's really problematic, especially if the foundated sense of self is already vulnerable. Because then what happens? So, I see people get little trophies for, or they've done an $8,000 month. I think that's a great thing, right? But where's the trophies for? I've been really working on my emotional health, or what else? But the problem is, what happens the month you don't do the $8,000 then? What happens if it's a $2,000 month? And if that's where you're connecting your sense of worth, it's a problem. So we have to layer these things right, get the founded stuff. Then you can do all the extra stuff on top. And even marketing and that kind of thing. I think with good marketing, as we know, you can really get a lot of stuff. You can get a lot of traction. We see a lot of people come out in a blaze of glory, and then we don't hear from them again. Why? Possibly because the founded stuff wasn't there. So actually you're marketing something that is already quite fragile from an individual point of view, even if the product is strong. So there's a lot to think about here. I think so we need more focus in on this, and recognizing so that we can change our relationship with Bob and ego. We can change our relationship with these things. But either in the driving seat is a problem. And actually, a lot of the problems, a lot of the drama we see on social media is just lots of people's bobs shouting at each other. And the ego, if we're not careful, especially when we think about success, I call it the Gollum effect. So Gollum is the character from Lord of the Rings. Some people might not know about him. So Gollum's one is like, oh, it's mine, my precious. I see this happen so many times. People think, right, this is my success. Protecting intellectual property is important. So it's not about that, but it's about saying, it's got to be mine. It's all mine. And that's all it is. And then guess what? We put up boundaries again. And I think most good success, there's a great little saying, which is likes are vanity, reputation is sanity. And I think that's a strong one for us. We need to be more supportive of colleagues to think you can build something really special over time and get it right and get it feeling right because you have a purpose. You are able to turn up as yourself as a human being and you know who you are as a professional. And then look for those opportunities when they arise. Because most success, true success actually, is based on the opportunities that come and us being available to take them and the collaborative effects of others. I look at my own thing. I feel that I'm a successful professional on the metrics that I've decided what that success looks like. And it's taken me a time to get there. And I got there through the amazing opportunities that were offered to me by others. It wasn't an Andy thing on my own. I take complete credit for everything I do myself because I know that only I could have done that because it's the only person I know who can do it, because that's me. In the same way for all of us. But so I think just talking about these things is important because like even the notion of success, the pre-described notion of what success should look like, we need to empower people to recognize you can decide on your own success, what that success looks like. And if you happen to be a professional who's like, I don't want to do the bigger stuff. I just want to help the dog in front of me and help the caregiver. And I want to earn money so that I can have a holiday and pay my rent. That is okay as well.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so interesting. We were literally just having this same conversation with someone else.
Yeah, with Hannah Malloy. And yeah, very, very similar in terms of, you need to have that. You need to know your purpose. You need to know why you are doing the things you are doing. And again, everything you've just said, like everybody has a different measurement for that success. And it's certainly something that we find time and time again with people who have come into our coaching world now, that they're all different. And some, we hear the phrases like, I literally just want to make a living wage. And even that, it's like, well, it's quite subjective. What's a living wage to you then? Because if you don't label it, if you don't name it and figure out all of these things, then I think that's where a lot of this overwhelm comes in as well. And you're looking at everybody else doing loads of different things, but their goals are going to be different to yours. They're a different type of person. Their model's going to be different. Arguably there could be some strategy involved and there may not be strategy involved, but there's all of this stuff that's under the surface level, which we just don't see and we're never going to know. And then we're very quick to judge, I suppose. And maybe that's where the bobs do come in.
Yeah. I love that. Looking at it, like naming it. That's great.
Yeah, the bob thing is important because we all have that part of what I say. And one thing about judgment, our brains are literally designed to judge. So there's two things about us humans. The first is we love to judge. And we love to judge based on the flimsiest of information, and our brain will go crazy with that information, right? Based on our own belief systems, our own value systems and everything. The second thing is, though, we hate to be judged. And that's because I often say in my talks about dog behavior, there's so many different views on behavior and all these different camps and all these different academic models. But for me, there's only two types of behavior. The behavior we judge in others and understanding what that's about. And I'll expand on that now. And secondly, the behavior we do ourselves. Because if you think about your own behavior today, how often have you thought about it? Well, the answer is you haven't. Because for the most of the time, we just behave. And we behave based on how we're feeling, how safe we feel, whether we're in pain, whether we're tired. All these things will will adapt our behavior and change what we do. So we know that's the case, but we find it hard to recognize that in others because we judge it. So our brain's literally designed to judge. And the thing is, when we get to adulthood, especially, it's created what we call a safe worldview. So all the information thinks, okay, this is what I think of the world. These are my belief systems. These are my value systems. Most of our belief system information has been put in by other people, especially when we're young, including our belief of self. That's why it has to be up for reappraisal when we're older. Hang on, just because I've been persuaded that I am that, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm not. Maybe that's so. So when we create that safe worldview, then the brain doesn't want to have to reappraise it much. Cognitive appraisal is what the brain wants to do, which is instant judgment decisions based on that perception, that worldview. And it protects that. It protects that with cognitive biases, cognitive distortions, all these kind of things, to stop it having to reappraise things. And this is important information for us as professionals anyway, because when we go to meet that client, they will have their safe worldview. They will have their value systems, belief systems. If I work with a client, and we've all been there, and then I don't hear from them, and then I find out they've gone to the shock jock train down the road, that is not about me, because I can evidence-base to myself if I want to. Hang on, I work with hundreds of clients every year, and that's not the case. That person didn't hear what they wanted to hear from me. That is their thing. We cannot force people to do stuff. We invite them to. I call it supported awareness. That's my role. That's my job, is to support their awareness of their own story, their own trauma, their own belief systems. If somebody has a value system, for example, based on, well, there must be a consequence for bad behavior, and it's set in place, it's hard to help them navigate that. So that's the thing about these things. It's to cognitively reappraise is difficult. So improving our own emotional health is recognizing, okay, I'm going to judge, but I can change my relationship with judgment. It doesn't have to drive my response. And this is the human bit of us. This is the us bit. This is the advanced bit. Now, it's interesting. There are those in society who think, being compassionate, being kind, being empathetic, it's all a bit snowflakey, it's all a bit wishy-washy. Actually, I think it's being the pinnacle of human existence. Anybody can just go live their life responding to their Bob. Anybody can just be in chimbrain all the time, and because that's easy. Thinking, actually, do you know what? That's challenging, and I can listen to Bob, but I can change my relationship with these feelings and not let it drive my response. That's coming up here. And that's what protects us and helps us to not only navigate ourselves professionally, but helps us to just be a better human being, I think, and understand this stuff. And that's why I've got my CAKE acronym, because we all love cake, right?
Love cake.
Compassion.
I haven't had any cake today.
I have a flapjack.
Every day. We're going to get some cake after this. We'll offer some cake now. So compassion, awareness, knowledge, and empathy. We need to try and bring cake more. See, the thing about compassion is it's beyond judgment. That's the beautiful thing. So compassion is about turning up anyway. So we've all been there. You read the intake form from a client. They've used the shock collar. They've pinned the dog down. They love Caesar Milan. He's amazing. Whatever it is that they're talking about. So your judgy brain is already kind of tutting away. Bob's there thinking. So compassion is the case saying, right, even though I judge that, I'm not going to let it drive my response. I'm going to turn up anyway. Compassion. And then awareness is about allowing myself. So compassion is about navigating our judgments. And awareness is about navigating our judgments and expectations. I'm going to allow myself to be in a neutral space to truly be aware of your lived experience. Even if it's not how I would do it, I want to be aware. I want to bear witness to your lived emotional experience. And then the knowledge is, rather than me spending the first hour telling them my knowledge, I'm going to spend that first hour truly wanting to learn knowledge from them. I want to really learn from them. And that helps us to be more empathetic. And this is the point about true empathy, really. But we need to give cake to ourselves as too. We need to give ourselves compassion. We need to be aware. We need to be honest. Tell you a little thing about compassion, about the power of it. I say my husband's a nurse at a hospice, and one of the prisons, they had an end-of-life prisoner, a very hardcore, violent prisoner. But they couldn't manage the symptom control, so the prisoner had to come into the hospice. So they took over part of the hospice, and it became a de facto prison. The prison guards were like, "Oh no, this is now a prison," and the nurses are like, "But it's a hospice." They had this friction. Two things. First of all, when my husband was giving this guy care, it was a guy. The guy was really not into any of it. A couple of days before he passed away, he was actually allowing Kieran to do care. And he actually said to Kieran, "You're one of the first people that's ever shown me care." That's compassion. But the big thing for me was one of the prison guards, who was the most challenging and difficult, was so moved by the compassion of the nursing staff. They now volunteer at the hospice. But that was the ultimate thing. So Kieran was aware of the offences and that, but the compassion meant, I'll care for you anyway. It's a powerful thing, compassion. So we need self-compassion first then. So I look at my life. I look at my own things that I've done. We all got a past. And I think, do you know what? I'll turn up for you anyway, Andy. I'll give myself compassion, actually, because we all have a story to tell. I talk about being vulnerable as being a big antidote to shame. Actually, I talk about my drug addiction that I had. I talk about my breakdown. These are just parts of my story, and I won't feel shame for them. And that's why, if it's appropriate, I'll share about them. And that's that thing about having self-compassion. It's recognizing, it was tough, and we change our relationship with it. Another really powerful word that we need to look at in our work that we do as dog trainers and behaviourists is the notion of guilt. Because many of our clients, that when we first meet them, especially because we work in a very compassionate way and using the very latest understanding of things, that we've got this odd time, haven't we, where we've never known more about the individual lived experience of the dog. And yet the general public have never been more detached from that information, oddly, because of the crap that's on telly, a lot of it, and the rise of social media, celebrities who haven't even got any training. So when we support their awareness, and because they're in their heads, when they meet us, they might think, "Oh, my dog's been dominant, my dog's been naughty, my dog's been difficult." And when they think, "Oh God, my dog was in pain, my dog was stressed, and I put that shock collar on them, or I did this thing to them," they're going to feel guilt. And I think that guilt is a word that we, as the professional, need to understand how we can support them to navigate that. So we have the 3 A's, which is something from my human therapy days, but I brought it into working with clients with doggies. The first A is awareness, and that's our job, is to support the awareness of the client to their dog's needs. The next A is acknowledgement. So we've now helped them to be aware of the fact that actually it's because your dog's stressed, but they need to acknowledge that. And guilt can really stop acknowledgement, because you can put about. And then the final A, by the way, is acceptance, because we think about it, we're taking the client through that journey, increased awareness, help them navigate acknowledgement, which is about their own biases and their own judgments and that kind of thing, and then get them through to acceptance, because best outcomes come from acceptance. And actually, a lot of things looked at in human psychology about acceptance, the caregivers of children with various neurodivergence, or children who function a little bit differently and have different needs, when the parent goes through awareness, acknowledgement, acceptance, it's been shown that unlocks their advocacy part of the brain. So before they knew about this stuff, they just thought, "Oh, my child's being difficult, challenging," and other people would judge them, and they'd feel really bad about the judgment because their child's having a meltdown. Once they've gone through awareness of what actually is happening for their child, acknowledgement of that challenge for the child, and acceptance, now they're more likely to advocate, because they're like, "Well, I don't give a that's what you think and judge me for. I know what's best for my child, and I will do what I can to support them." And that's what we see with our clients. But guilt can be a big one. So, and often we'll say to people, won't we, "Oh, don't feel guilty." But actually, I think we need to change that, because guilt can go one of two ways. If we allow it to, it will keep us chained to the past. because we just keep feeling that negative emotion and we just keep reliving it. If we change our relationship with it, so we take it away from Bob, because Bob's very good at the guilt, and think, okay, this feeling I'm feeling, this is what I say to my clients. I don't say to them, don't feel it. I say that what you're feeling, see that as a sign that you've learned something very deeply and viscerally now. And use that to drive your response moving forwards. Because rather than chain to the past now, it creates a door to the future, which is, do you know what, you're probably not going to do that again then. And that's the whole point. So value those feelings. We've got to value all our feelings. The painful stuff pains our friend, as they say, a little bit, because it's telling us something, that we're seeking relief for something, whether that's physical pain, emotional pain, social pain. So it's this notion again of changing our relationship with those things, not having them, not stopping them. So if you say, don't feel guilty, they're still going to feel it, but they're probably not going to talk about it now. That's the problem with saying don't or stop, rather than think, well, maybe we need to change our relationship with that and think about what that's telling us and how do we use that. And this brings us on to another thing. We do like these kind of things, don't we, like 3 A's, and we also got 3 C's. So the first C is control. Our brain wants to predict outcomes. It likes to control outcomes. That fits in with that safe worldview again, and judgments and expectations. It's like, I need the world to be exactly like this. And this is a problem when we think about behavior more generally, because if you've got a dog, for example, who's challenging that view of what a dog should be and how a dog should behave, the brain thinks, right, you need to behave in a way that fits my worldview again. And this is why punishment can be so easily done, even by the most caring of caregiver, because in their brain, they think, if you can just stop that, we'll all be okay. So control, we want to control outcome, obsessed with it. When we can't, then the brain needs to change that. I need to change that to get control again. But there are some things that come along, like, for example, a dog with very challenging behaviors. Grief is another one. Of course, you can't change it. And we can get stuck in change. And change is also very connected to things like guilt and shame. Because guess what? You can't go back in time. So you get stuck there. The final C is the powerful one. We have to, understanding these things and reminding ourselves, thinking, okay, yes. Andy said something about the third C, which is the powerful one, that is choice. Choice is the thing that gives us control again. I have a choice now about how I respond to these feelings, my relationship to these feelings, about what I do next. And that's where the power comes back again. Otherwise, we just get stuck. So understanding these things isn't just about us as human beings. It's really important when working with the general public, because we can get better outcomes rather than kind of pushing that client into a place where they are struggling with cognitive dissonance now and all these other things because of the perceived pressure from us. Part of their brain saying, well, I kind of see that, but I feel this here and I feel that there, or my own experience of this, my own trauma, my own lack of secure attachments, all these kind of things. So actually, when we don't get those prescribed outcomes, it's not because they're lazy or they're not doing the work or that we're not good enough. It's just because on a very human level, we weren't able to support them to navigate some of these things that we can all find difficult and challenging, actually.
Yeah. Do you know what, when you talk about it like that, you realize just how hard this job is, don't you? Like, you're not just trying to understand a completely different species, which we all spend far too much time and money learning about. And you've then got the human half of it, which I almost think it feels like it's almost forgotten a little bit because we're so focused on the dog, forgetting that that dog is attached to a human, and the human is the one that is going to buy your services. The human is going to be the one that connects with you. They're the one that's going to have to go through these emotions, like you've just said. And it's whether or not a lot of us are actually equipped to deal with that. And that's what certainly, like, I see a lot of in those social media groups, that people struggle with that therapy role, I suppose.
Yeah. And arguably, if you understand your clients better and you can put yourself in that place of going, I can see their response. I can see they're not doing the work as much as possibly we would have hoped. You know, you go back a couple of weeks later and they haven't managed to do what you hoped they would do. And instead of them putting it on a social media group and going, oh my God, my client never does the, I mean, we see it a lot. I'm sure you do as well. And it's kind of like taking a step back and going, there's a good reason why it's not happened. Have we explored that? Have we tried to figure out what that is? And a lot of the work we pride ourselves in kind of having that really great relationship with our clients and being able to ask those questions and do it in a way that doesn't make them feel uncomfortable and draws the information out of them so that we get the best possible outcome for them and also for their dog as well. So arguably this is the most important work to do as a dog trainer, because you want them on side and you'll have you'll have a much better career as a dog trainer if you've got amazing clients that do the work. So I think this is so like profound when it comes to just...
Yeah. It's like an epiphany moment, isn't it? When we all know it. We all say these offhand remarks of like, oh, I feel like a therapist or a marriage counsellor and all of this, but you kind of are because there's a lot going on.
And we don't have to become, you don't have to go to... got to go and become a psychotherapist. What I do in my emotional health workshops is give the basic foundatory stuff of this stuff, because we're dog trainers and also at the end of the day, we're not there to provide that. But there's some really simple things that we can put in place that we need to educate more about, I think, to support people. And which brings us back to what we were talking about at the beginning, really. Having a better sense of self is so important. Thinking about who we are as a professional. And there is a darker side to empathy we have to be really mindful of. There's a construct in human psychology called the righting reflex. So the ultimate thing I want to try and do with anybody that I support and do and give kind of any mentoring to, whatever, is to help them to be really good, to improve their ability to turn up, to be bear witness to the emotional lived experience of another, both the dog and the human, but to also recognize they're not responsible for it. Is the darker side to empathy is, oh my God, I feel your pain and I must put it right. And that's where a lot of dog trainers end up. I'm somehow responsible for this final outcome. We're not here to take on the burden of others. So that's where our boundaries come in well. And, the wonderful Brené Brown, who I highly recommend people look up, you cannot be empathetic and compassionate to others if you're not compassionate with good boundaries yourself first. That's what she educates on, because you have to be. And, some boundaries are negotiable. They are. There are some that for me are non-negotiable, but there are some that are negotiable. I will never do less for anybody, but there are some people like, I do more. And you just feel you connect. And that's, but if that's every other client, you've got a problem, And so this notion of the righting reflex, we have to be really mindful of it and think, okay, I'm going to learn what I can about good communication, because that's what it's about, actually, good listening skills, thinking about how I control my own bob, tame my bob a little bit, thinking about how I can be better at just turning up as me and being really clear about what I'm there to do. I have a lot of people, because of my dog center care platform and trying to move away from a task-orientated way of training to a care-orientated way, which just means learning from the dog first. That's the only difference, really. Because part of the problem with task-orientated training only is I think it feeds into the mental health problem. Because if you've got, I'm a dog trainer, therefore I'm going to teach this dog loose leash walking, because that's the task, and I'm just going to be very task-orientated. If we can't do the task, that means somebody's to blame. So either the dog's no good, the client's no good, or I feel as a trainer I can't do my job. But in fact, the real thing is the dog can't do the task because they're too stressed, they're in pain, they're whatever it is, So I think that's the shift. So a lot of people then say, I really want to work this way, Andy. I get it. But I've got all these people turning up in my dog training classes who have all these expectations about sit down, come stay and all that kind of stuff. And how do we persuade all these people? And I say, if you're thinking with that mindset, we've already got the wrong mindset. You should think, I'm going to put on my class how I want to. I'm not going to make assumptions about what the general public may or may not want. When they come, I'm going to show them something that will either resonate for them or they won't. And I can tell you with colleagues who do work and take that leap of faith, that the vast majority of the general public are amazed with this extra stuff. Because they have a pre-described idea in their head about what a dog training thing might look like, maybe. They might have seen it on telly, they might have gone to one when they were a kid, but that's about it. It's not like they've read 10 volumes of what a dog training class should look like, So this comes back to everything we talked about at the top of the session, really, the hour, about who are you as a professional? What is your purpose? Believe in the purpose. Believe in yourself, yeah, but I think that's a bit of a cliche, really. It's about being yourself. You don't have to even believe in it. It's like, I can only turn up as Andy, so that's it. Then I've got my purpose and I believe in my purpose. And it is tough out there. It really shouldn't be this hard. I feel a bit emotional. I think sometimes about my purpose. My purpose is very much about how do I try and support as many people to have a mindset shift? Not here's a model, here's a program. It's like, how can I support people to see behavior differently? Because if you see behavior differently in the dog, you'll see behavior differently in yourself and your clients and everything else, because we're breaking away from a lot of the conformist norms. So that's my purpose. But on the way, it's tough. I've had my trolls, I've had all the crap, I've had lies said about me and all the usual stuff. In the old days, people just wanted to criticize you, but now there are some people out there who just want to bring you down. They just really want to do it. So it's tough, and it shouldn't be this hard. I think about that sometimes, but it's my purpose that keeps me turning up, because that's the point. And it's the same if you're running your dog training class and your puppy class. So yeah, all these things are important, all these layers, but we do need, like what you create for your clients, we need more safe spaces. We need more opportunities for people to be vulnerable, because people think that's a bit odd, but they think it's odd because they're confusing being vulnerable with feeling vulnerable. Feeling vulnerable is not great. Feeling vulnerable is giving away power and control. Being vulnerable, however, is claiming, and we have something called the vulnerability hierarchy. The one person on the planet you should be the most vulnerable with is yourself. And that's allowing yourself to reappraise your life, reappraise those things, change those relationships with those feelings and those kind of stuff. And then obviously with my husband, he's the person I'm most vulnerable with. It's not like I stand on the corner of the street and say, hi, everybody, I used to have a drug addiction. But it's about, that's the beautiful thing about healthy boundaries. Boundaries for me, a lot of the time, especially professional, we think about boundaries being about not checking your emails after 6 o'clock, not taking calls at weekends. It is that. But I don't make any distinction between personal and professional boundaries. My boundaries are my boundaries. Boundaries is an external layer of self that help me decide what I let in and what I let out. That's the point. I think it's important. And when the fact that some troll might say something doesn't mean it's true. And I think this is the key. And Bob will want to grab onto that. And one thing about Bob is Bob likes to talk often in destructive language. So we have to change our relationship with that and try and make it into more of a descriptive language. So, for example, when I put out the workshop last year and it was tumbleweed, Bob wants to be, you've lost your spark. Nobody's interested now. You're off the boil. You're yesterday's news, all that kind of stuff. And I have to take a breath and think, right, clearly, if I'm thinking about it descriptively, I need to reconsider about how I propose that workshop. That's a more descriptive way. So also, for example, if a client leaves a negative review, Bob wants to be destructive. But we can take a breath and think, right, now, hang on, let's just be more descriptive. Clearly, that person didn't value my services. That's more descriptive. And again, it's about learning about what we see externally, moving away from what Bob wants to do, which is making it about us, and instead allowing us to think, what does that say about me? thinking about what does that say to me? What does it say to me about that person, their own beliefs, their own value systems, their own everything else, because it has nothing to do with me. I think that's the key. So it's just understanding these things and promoting it more for our colleagues, really, and recognizing that we all struggle with it. Everybody does. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt when things go wrong, and it doesn't hurt when you get the trolls, and it doesn't hurt when somebody just puts a stupid comment on a post. Because Bob will, this is Bob again. You put out a post, you have 30 amazing comments and one that is critical. I've literally known colleagues who have said to me, I've had hundreds of positives and one negative, and I've actually taken the post down. But that's Bob. Bob's powerful, right? Yeah. If we allow Bob to be, or your version of Bob.
Yeah. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because on our coaching programs, we arguably most of the work is the inner work that people need to do before, like we could very well sort of go, right, here's this thing that you need to start to offer and you need to raise your prices by this much. But if you haven't done any of that self-work and you're not comfortable with it and you don't feel confident with it, it's never going to work, is it? You can't offer or deliver a service that you don't believe in. So you've got to believe in yourself. You've got to believe in that this is the right thing for the client. So mindset and inner work for us is arguably the biggest challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's so crucial to do that self-work, that self-development, that character development, whichever you want to call it. Without it, I think it makes running a business really challenging. It makes trying to do something you love alongside your family and friends really challenging, because you don't know where to split your time or your energy or who you are in both of those spaces as well. Like you feel like sometimes you have to be different. And I think the most profound bit of work I've ever done for myself personally is knowing that actually this is who I am, and I will bring work into my personal conversations because it is part of me. I enjoy this entrepreneurial life. I enjoy talking business. I enjoy talking dogs. I enjoy talking psychology. I'm bringing it forward into home educating my kids. And it all encompasses in this one thing. And I realized the more I tried to split those parts of me into, oh, you only get this version of me when I'm in this room, and you get, and I was like, oh, it's hard work. So I was like, actually, no, I'm just going to encompass it all. You get to take me in. Actually, from a business perspective with working with clients, they get to see all of me so they can relate to the bits that they can. They can understand the bits that they don't. But ultimately, it's being okay as well with, we've had a client recently who just randomly, we've never had this happen before, but just randomly decided, do you know what? You said something in it and it must have triggered them. And they've gone, I'm not doing anymore, I'm out. And we're like, whoa, where has that come from? But actually, because we are so, we've done so much work on ourselves, and we're like, no, we know our purpose, we know our mission, we know that actually, in the grand scheme of things, we're just not a good fit for each other at this moment in time for where you are on your journey. So I'm good, it's okay. And we were just saying, weren't we, even if that was a few years ago, I'd have probably been a little bit of a puddle on the floor going, oh my goodness me, what's happened? Why have you walked away? What have I done?
I love that.
So it's really important.
It's a really good example of how you've changed your relationship with something very important. And that's our attachment to social rejection. Because when you work at a healthy self-esteem, which is just recognizing your own worth and recognizing your enough, shouldn't be confused with ego. Ego is separate. And you have good boundaries. I can tell you now that more people won't like you. This is something we must recognize. It's okay at promoting boundaries, but we also must recognize that I look at some of the rubbish that's been said about me, and almost to the person, they're people I've said no to. Because, and it's interesting for me, because when you pitch yourself up as a supportive space, great. and talk about these things, talk about compassion, and then somebody tries to manipulate you or control you or make you do something and you say no, it's easy for their brain to think, oh, he's not who he says he is then, is he? Because he's not done what I want. So therefore he's not who he says he is. That's the point. This is the thing. And that's a common response to somebody with healthy boundaries. So we have to recognize that there's a part of our brain, we call it social evaluative threat. And it's been shown as a part of the brain that actually is the same part of the brain that deals with physical pain. So social rejection hurts. And that's why we end up falling into people pleasing and having porous boundaries and devaluing ourselves to please others. So actually what you've gone on your own little relationship there is that, as you say, that person clearly at this time didn't value what you're doing or didn't feel it, or whatever the reason was. But that's not about you. And I think we can often put a little, we can often ask stuff. We can always say, would you feel comfortable in sharing with me why you feel that way? We can always do that. But that should be a fact-finding mission, not how can I change myself to make it right for you? Because that's a problem again. It's like, and this doesn't mean that we end up never reappraising our stuff. If I have a client who isn't very happy, I will always think, okay, I will reappraise myself. I won't reappraise based on somebody trying to shame me to do it. I won't do that. But we always have to reappraise things, of course. But so I think that's a really powerful story there. And I think we need to recognize and we must talk about what comes with good boundaries, because people don't like to be said no to. People don't like you to say, actually, I feel uncomfortable with that. Because I try and be Andy, as I say, it doesn't matter who the person is, whether it's a family friend, a colleague, or somebody I've just met on the tube. People can get very friendly with you. This will happen with clients because it's quite an intense process that we go through with clients, isn't it? Sometimes, and sometimes we're the only person in that world that's listening to them and supporting them. And some of our clients were perhaps the first person in their adult life that's actually bothered to listen to them. So that's intense, right? And I've had many situations where I've had to say, I hear you, but actually this is something I don't feel comfortable. That's not a space I feel comfortable being in this situation, that kind of thing. And some people can find that hard, actually. But it's important for us. So if you're doing your boundaries well, you have to accept the fact that some people won't like it. Because invariably you're saying no. And that's another universal law. For everything you say yes to, you are saying no to something else. And like you kind of alluded to earlier, if that no is your husband, your wife, your kids, your dogs, if that no is to yourself, then it's a problem. If you're all constantly doing that.
Yeah. No, it is. You could talk about this forever, couldn't you? It's just, it's so important. And I genuinely believe that the success metrics that we are working towards are because we have got that healthy relationship with ourselves. Like we know who we are inside and out. And I mean, we'd be lying if we said something still didn't rock us. Like with that experience this week, we were like, oh, what's that? And you do the initial reaction. It's like, yeah, like what is going on? And we do the reach out bit. And then we're like, do you know what though? Again, I'm actually fine with it. It is absolutely fine. We do a bit of a debrief between ourselves and go, what could it be? Like, what could we improve rather? So like, not what have we done wrong? It's like, what can we learn from that situation? And in some cases, it's do you know what? I genuinely just think on that particular one, it was just a mismatch of values and something.
It was a bit of methodology. She was coming from a different way of training to our way. And maybe there was something in that transition that wasn't quite sitting well with her.
Yeah. And we were like, do you know, it's something that's completely out of our control. And then in other scenarios, we're like, okay, how can we learn from that experience? And then if we find it valuable enough to go, let's not change who we are, but let's maybe incorporate a little bit more awareness. And maybe we can ask a better question to get a better answer instead of assuming and doing all of that kind of stuff. So I think, yeah, it's so important to do that work on yourself. And I think it's important to realize that it's not a case if you do this work once. It is a continuous journey. And that's where we are massive believers in. You have to have an amazing support network around you. And that can include your family, that can include your friends. But actually, I personally think it's super important to have people around you in that professional capacity as well, because they're not as close to you. And it's weird, isn't it? You almost feel like you open up more to strangers than you do to your loved ones. And maybe that is through, I don't know, like a lack of fear of judgment. That could be a whole other conversation in itself. But I think it's important to have a really good peer group around you. Like we were talking earlier again about having mentors and mentees in your life. Like you need that dance of both. Because without it, you can't know who you are. You're always on a journey of growth and you're always trying to rediscover it. And then all of this can be input back into your business so that you can serve your clients better, serve the dogs better, and ultimately just have, hopefully, an all-round better quality of life.
Yeah, 100%. Because that's powerful what you said there. I think that's the kind of essence of it all, isn't it? And I've just started a service that I'm going to build over the coming months called Safe Space for this very reason, really, to offer a safe space for those who want to have that safe space once a month, a form of supervision where I can do it for a small number of people, but where we see each other every month and we can talk about cases, we can talk about professional development, especially those people who want to keep thinking about working in different ways. It's a form of mentoring or their own emotional development. I've got something I call CPD, compassionate professional development. And that's what I want to do there, but we need those spaces. And I have a therapist that I see. I don't need to see them from that point of view, but so that's my form of supervision. Now, she's not a dog trainer. She could be now, actually, because I share so much with her. But it's invaluable to me. Do you know, I think if you're spending more on hot dog sausages than you are on self-care in your business, then I think there's something you've got to really think about that. So it's tax deductible as well, and I think it's really important because it's part of my support process. So I know I speak to her every 6 weeks or so. I know it's coming. If I need to speak earlier, I will. But I before Christmas I had a really challenging case that ended up being a euthanasia. That was my space, and I can talk to my husband about it. And he's always lovely to talk to, but he doesn't get it in that sense. And I'm also aware of his experience. I'm thinking, you've had a really crap day at the hospice today. I'm not going to share about a dog that's been put away. So like you say, sometimes it's good to have somebody who's a bit detached. So even if you don't have that direct thing, see some. I think it'd be healthy for us all to have a form of external offloading that happens regularly. And even psychologically, what I want to try and do with kind of safe space really is that those people who want to kind of access something like that, even knowing that you have that chance for that little safety valve, because it's coming up. This is what happens with your clients. I'm sure they know I'll get to speak to a girl, so that's great. They know it's coming up. And we talk about having that level of accountability in the process, but it works both ways, I think, sometimes. I think that it's an important thing. So, yeah, we need more of that. We need to create that. So I'm totally in agreement with you. You need to find those people that you can build around you. The problem is, I think we've got a very crowded space, especially on social media. There are those in the business world who aren't as ethically minded as you two, for a start off. I think this is the key. And especially the advent of kind of a life coachy thing that's going on, which rather than that person saying, right, I'm going to hold space for you and I'm going to help support you and have those boundaries that we need so I can help you find your authentic path. They're basically saying, this is what worked for me in my life and my trauma, so I'll get you to do the same. And it isn't going to work then. This is the key. It's about giving a mindset shift, and people can find the threads that they need. Okay, that's valuable to me based on my journey that I'm on and how I feel supported in self, not that somebody else is trying to make me into something different.
Yeah, it's very true. Very true. Right.
What a lovely conversation. Thank you so much.
I could continue this. This could quite easily be like a 6-hour long podcast.
It could be.
I love it. So we'll definitely pick up maybe like a part 2.
Yeah, part 1 and part 2. Andrew, we'd love to know who you know that we could invite onto our podcast to keep spreading our message and getting this out to as many people as possible. Is there anybody that springs to mind that you think we could have on here?
Well, there's loads of people. Do you know Holly? Do you know Holly Tent?
Yes.
Holly is a clinical psychologist and a clinical behaviourist. And Holly is one of the most wonderful human beings. She really gets all aspects. She'd be a fascinating person, I'm sure, to have a conversation with. Laura Donaldson's a lot of fun. Professor Laura Donaldson, of course, but me and Laura do a lot of work together. She's really into trauma. She does a lot of trauma-based things, both ends of the lead. Rachel Leather's another person. So Rachel was a human trauma expert. She now works with doggies. And they're both good fun, good kind of guests to kind of talk about these different aspects, really, about the different challenges. But I think any of those three wonderful ladies would be a joy for you, and to go deep on stuff, but in a fun way.
I love it. Joy, deep and fun, my favourite.
Great mix.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you ever so much for your time, Andy. It's been lovely chatting to you. I'm definitely going to get you booked in for like part 2, maybe 3 and 4.
Excellent.
Well, of course, you're up in my hometown.
I know.
That's true.
So I do come up to Solihull a fair bit. So next time I maybe come to the studio with you.
Yeah, definitely.
Fab.
You need to get that coffee date sorted.
Yes. Great.
If people want to find out more about you, where's the best place to find you?
So Dog Centre Care is my platform on social media. So you can find that. I'm in the process of updating the Dog Centre Care website. Actually, it's dogcc.org. And all my kind of dog-centered care stuff's there. And also information about Safe Space, because Safe Space is part of Dog Centre Care, really, because it's all about the mindset shift. So yeah, dogcc.org, or go search Dog Centre Care on Facebook, and all the amazing conversations I've had in Dog Centre Care. And I think it'd be great to have you two to come into Dog Centre Care. We could have a chat about these things. For my side, my crowd really, who need to hear some of the things about what you're doing. But they're up on the Dog Centre Care YouTube channel.
Fabulous. We'll put all those details in the show notes for everyone to find them.
Yeah. Thanks once again, Andy. We'll see you soon.
Yeah, great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
See you. Bye.
Bye.